Hi, so this is self video number 2, and this video focuses on the chapter reading for the science portion of our class from pages 401 to 410, and also on the article The Winter War of 1939. So what we had to read for this week was all about climate, which is the general pattern of weather that occurs for a region over a number of years. So it's just like the overall long term of what that general area's weather and temperatures are like. Climate determines the type of vegetation, the plants and animals that will live in that location, the houses people build, the lifestyle, the landscape, the soil, the suitability for agriculture, and basically everything is affected because of the climate, how people live, how they'll do things, and how they'll react to certain situations. Now, the heating and the way radiation works depends on two major factors, which is the intensity of solar radiation and the time radiation is received at the surface. And because radiation reaches different latitudes at different angles during different times of the year, there are 3 groups of latitudes which also correlate to the 3 types of climate zones. The first is the low latitudes, which is between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, and is also known as the tropical climate zone. In these low latitudes, there's high solar radiation and high temperatures that vary little from month to month. So it's basically warm with high temperatures all year round. The second is the high latitudes, which is also known as the polar climate zone. These latitudes are located above the Arctic and Antarctic circles. And in these areas, there's max radiation during one part of the year and none during the other. So the overall temperature is low with the highest range of annual temperatures. The third group is the middle latitudes, which is also known as the temperate climate zone. And in these zones, high radiation takes place in one part of the year and it's low during another. So the temperature is cooler than the low latitudes and they have wide seasonal variations. And so from our textbook, here's a picture to give you a visual of the climate zones. So you can see that in the middle is the tropical climate zone, and then right above that is the temperate, and on the poles of the 2 Earths is the polar climate zone. So along with different climate zones, there is also wet and dry zones, which can be seen on page 405 of our textbook. And here is a visual of the map, and it shows you can see that some zones are wet and some are dry. And a lot of it depends on where they're located with their latitudes. So along with these different locations, there's also regional climatic influences. And there's 4 of them. These include altitude, mountains, large bodies of water, and ocean currents. At altitude, air temperature decreases as the altitude decreases. So the locations with higher altitudes will have lower average temperatures. Mountains is the second influence, which affects passing air masses. For example, in the western United States, air mass loses moisture as precipitation falls on the western side. So the west side will have more fallout. The west side of mountains will have more forests, while the east side is more dry and will have more grassland or desert. The third influence is large bodies of water, which has higher specific heat than land, transparent, and loses energy through evaporation. So it makes temperature more even from day to night and from summer to winter. So it just makes it more flat and even and regulatory. The fourth climatic influence is the ocean currents, which bring water that has temperatures different from the land and can move warm water northward and cool water southward. So climates generally blend into one another, so no 2 places on Earth have the same exact climate. So these are just general categories that you can relate to, but in general, every climate is going to be slightly different. Another term that is talked about in the chapter is climate change, which is the departure from one expected average pattern of climate for a region over time. And this can be researched and compared to using proxy data, which is the natural source used to infer temperature change, rainfall, or some other past climate condition. So proxy data is very important to see like what the Earth used to be like hundreds of thousands of years ago. So the Earth's climate has undergone major changes, especially with ice ages and then more warmer periods. So the warming and cooling cycles occur in large cycles, so you can't really notice it from year to year, but when you look at it over hundreds and hundreds of years, you can see that there is a difference. So in the last 25 years, there's been a 0.4 degree Fahrenheit increase in the Earth's temperature, and the sea level has increased 1 to 2 millimeters a year for the past 100 years. So we are currently in a warming stage and moving more towards an ice age. So there are causes of global climate change, which include astronomical changes such as solar energy and changes in the sun's output, and this can be seen through sunspots, which are dark spots that appear to move around the surface of the sun, and the amount of solar energy increases as the number of sunspots increase. So, and the shorter cycles have more normal temperatures, and lower temperatures occur in longer cycles of sunspots. The Earth's tilt, orbital shape, and axis wobble changes also have an effect on the global climate change. Some atmospheric changes that can influence the climate are greenhouse gases, which re-radiate heat to produce a warmer climate, with water vapor being the most abundant. Another issue that is talked about a lot in our culture today is global warming. And to determine if global warming is happening, it goes through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, also known as the IPCC, which releases reports and makes projections about climate change based on changes in climate models. And even though there are many experts in this field, there's also many disagreements between them. And because of this, there are different arguments saying global warming is happening, global warming is not happening. So I think it's very interesting that they can all be experts in the same field, yet all have very different opinions. So all of this can relate to the article we had to read, which was titled The Winter War of 1939. Leading up to this war, Finland refused to trade land to the Soviet Union, so Stalin initiated a war in November of 1939. I thought this war was going to be short, simple, sweet, and that they would get the land, no problem done. But this winter ended up being one of the coldest winters on record. It was being 3 to 10 degrees Celsius below average, so it was very cold. The war ended up lasting until March 1940, so a war that was expected to last a couple weeks lasted several months. And there were several reasons why Finland was successful for the majority of this war. One of the reasons is that Finland was able to adapt to their surroundings. During this time of this extreme winter, there was 4 hours of daylight a day with a negative 30 degree Fahrenheit temperature, along with blizzard conditions. So it was snowing, it was freezing, it was very horrible conditions. So the Soviet Union wore dark uniforms, so it made them easily spotted in the white snow, while Finland wore white and blended in with their surroundings. They also used skis in order to get around and transport, while the Soviet Union was very dependent on vehicles and artillery, which froze during the war because it was so cold, especially their engines and their lubricants for their semi-automatic guns. So they needed to develop new technology and new engines in order to be successful. However, this didn't happen for another year, and by this time the war was over. However, with the new leadership of Timoshenko from the Soviet Union, they were able to finally adjust and able to conquer Finland once the weather started to get a little more bearable. And in 1940, the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. That forced Finland to give Russia 9% of their territory and 20% of their industrial capacity. So where this war took place was on the border of Finland and Russia, which is in the Arctic Circle, so it was at a high latitude, and also part of the polar climate where the average temps normally are below 50 degrees. But because of weather, there was an extreme that happened this winter, and it really did play an effect. So in many of the world events, weather can play a very large role, depending on the type of climate, the latitudes, and other factors such as mountains, altitude, large bodies of water, and ocean currents. So all these geological factors play a part in weather. So my 2 discussion questions for this section are, what other climate factors could have had an effect on the Finland-Russia war? They mainly talked about what they wore. So what other factors could have played a part? Another question is, why didn't the Soviets adjust sooner? They're one of the leading powers in the country, yet it took them 4 months to be able to get themselves together and be able to finally defeat Finland. So why couldn't they adjust to this sooner? Thank you, and see you in class on Monday.